Alright, so today we're diving into the different types of argument structures you'll encounter in Carr's passages and how understanding these can significantly boost your performance. Every Carr's passage presents an argument, whether it's convincing, informing, or exploring a topic. The AAMC's test writers carefully choose each passage and design the questions to assess how well you understand the passage's argument, its claims, and its persuasiveness. The more familiar you become with traditional structures of arguments, the better you'll be able to navigate Carr's passages. The three major argumentation styles that show up frequently in the humanities and social sciences are classical, Rogerian, and Toulmin. By learning these, you'll see the structure and flow of Carr's passages more clearly. Classical argument. Let's start with the classical argument, which traces its origins back to Aristotle's rhetoric in ancient Greece. Despite being written in the 4th century BCE, it remains one of the most influential works on persuasion. The classical argument is built around three key rhetorical appeals: ethos, pathos, and logos. Understanding these appeals helps you recognize how authors in Carr's passages try to persuade their audience. Ethos. This appeal focuses on credibility. The author attempts to establish trust by citing reliable sources, sharing relevant qualifications, or acknowledging opposing viewpoints. If a passage makes a strong appeal to ethos, you might see the author referencing their own expertise or including reputable sources to back up their claims. Pathos. This is the appeal to emotion, where the author tries to evoke a particular feeling from the reader. This could involve using vivid imagery, compelling stories, or an emotionally charged writing style. For Carr's passages that emphasize pathos, it's important to ask yourself how the author's choice of words or examples is meant to make you feel. Logos. This appeal is grounded in logic and reason. It involves presenting evidence, rational arguments, and well-structured reasoning to persuade the audience. You'll often see this in passages that use data or statistics to make a point. The structure of a classical argument typically follows 6 components. Exordium, introduction. The passage starts with an introduction that captures the reader's attention. It provides context for the argument and sets the tone. Narratio, background. Here, the author provides background information that the audience needs to understand the argument. Partitio, proposition. The main claim or thesis is presented, along with an outline of the reasoning that will support it. Confirmatio, evidence and proof. This is the meat of the argument, where logic and evidence are used to support the claims. Refutatio, counterarguments. The author addresses potential counterarguments to demonstrate that they have considered other perspectives. Peroratio, conclusion. The argument wraps up with a conclusion that summarizes the main points and often includes an emotional appeal to persuade the audience to accept the thesis. In Carr's, passages may not follow this exact structure, but you will frequently see elements of it. For instance, the author may start by introducing the topic, exordium, present some background, narratio, and then make a central claim, partitio, before diving into the supporting evidence, confirmatio. Rogerian argument. Next, let's look at the Rogerian argument, which is centered around finding common ground and building mutual understanding. Inspired by Carl Rogers' humanistic psychology, this type of argument is often used to reduce polarization and find areas of agreement rather than solely trying to convince the audience of a particular point. Rogerian arguments typically follow this structure. Introduction. The author presents the problem in a way that everyone can understand and agree on. The aim is to identify shared concerns. Summary of opposing views. The author describes opposing viewpoints fairly, showing that they have genuinely considered them. Statement of validity. The author acknowledges that the opposing views may be justified under certain conditions. Writer's position. The author then presents their own position and explains the specific circumstances under which it holds true. Statement of benefits. Finally, the author appeals to the interests of those with opposing views, showing how adopting the author's perspective could benefit them. Recognizing a Rogerian approach in a Carr's passage can help you understand when an author is presenting alternative viewpoints to empathize with others, rather than outright dismissing them. If a passage seems to shift from one perspective to another and then reaches a synthesis, the author may be using a Rogerian structure to find a balanced solution. Toulmin argument. Now, let's move on to the Toulmin argument, which was developed by British philosopher Stephen Toulmin This model emphasizes the need for arguments to provide rational justification for their claims. It's a great framework for evaluating the quality of an argument, and you'll often find elements of the Toulmin model in Carr's passages. The Toulmin framework consists of 6 components. Claim. This is the statement the author wants the audience to accept as true. It's essentially the argument's main point. Evidence, grounds. These are the facts or data that support the claim. This is where the author builds their case. Warrant. The warrant connects the evidence to the claim, showing why the evidence justifies the claim. The strength of the warrant can determine whether the argument is persuasive. Backing. Additional support for the warrant may be provided here to further strengthen the argument. Rebuttal. The author acknowledges potential objections to the claim and addresses them. Qualifier. The qualifier adds nuance by indicating that the claim may not be true in all situations. Words like usually, presumably, or most likely help to communicate the limits of the argument. Understanding the Toulmin model can help you spot weaknesses in an argument, such as when the evidence doesn't fully support the claim, or when the author uses vague qualifiers to hedge their statements. When you identify these weaknesses in a passage, you can bet that a question will target that area. Putting it all together. So, what's the practical takeaway here? It's not about trying to label every Carr's passage with one of these structures, but rather using your knowledge of classical, Rogerian, and Toulmin arguments to better understand the passage's flow and how the author constructs their argument. Many passages will blend elements from each model. When you read critically, ask yourself questions like, what is the argument's purpose? Is the author trying to inform, persuade, or find common ground? What strategies are they using to appeal to the reader? Is the argument well supported by evidence, or does it have weaknesses? Recognizing these elements helps you anticipate what kinds of questions you might face and how to approach them. Practicing with passages. Students often think that once they've finished a passage and reviewed the answers, they're done with it forever. But you can actually learn a lot from revisiting passages and examining them through the lens of different argument structures. The test writers at AAMC know these passages inside and out, and by studying them thoroughly, you can reach a similar level of understanding. Try revisiting a passage from earlier modules and identify whether it contains elements of classical, Rogerian, or Toulmin arguments. Break down how the author constructs their claims, what evidence they use, and whether there are any counter-arguments or qualifiers. Over time, you'll start to anticipate the types of questions that will be asked and understand the test writer's approach. Application of argument analysis in Carrs. In practice, you'll encounter arguments that are built on ethos, pathos, and logos, but you'll also need to evaluate how effectively these appeals are used. Is the author over-relying on emotional appeals? Is there enough evidence to support the claims? Are there any counter-arguments that weaken the author's position? For example, in passages with a Rogerian structure, you might notice the author presenting a viewpoint that they don't actually agree with, only to pivot later in the passage. In a question, you could be asked about the author's true position, and understanding this structure will help you avoid being misled by the alternative viewpoints. In Toulmin-based arguments, be on the lookout for how the author backs up their warrants. If the backing is weak or vague, the passage might have a question that challenges the validity of the evidence. If you can pinpoint where the argument lacks support, you're already one step ahead. Final thoughts. When it comes to Carrs, you're not just reading. You're actively engaging with the passage, understanding its structure, and anticipating the questions that might follow. By learning the traditional argumentation models, you'll be better equipped to analyze passages and answer questions with confidence. As you continue practicing, use this framework to refine your reading strategy and critical thinking skills. And for more Carrs practice, download the King of the Curve app or visit kingofthecurve.org. We offer over 200 free Carrs passages to help you get the practice you need. Let's boost those scores together.